The night air hung heavy and still, thick with the scent of freshly cut grass and something else, something metallic and sharp that lingered around the newly assembled structure. It was just after midnight, the kind of quiet that feels like the world is holding its breath. My hands, calloused from weeks of clandestine work, meticulously tightened the last bolt on the custom-fabricated target stand. It wasn't just any target stand. This one stood proudly, defiantly, precisely 3 feet from the manicured, emerald green lawn that fronted the Willow Creek Homeowners Association administrative building. Their building, a squat, brick box of bureaucratic tyranny, usually seemed imposing. Tonight, under the pale glow of my headlamp, it looked like a terrified mouse cornered by a very large, very angry cat. A low, guttural growl rumbled deep in my chest as I recalled Deborah's smug face, her dismissive wave, the day my essential supplies had been turned away. Non-compliant delivery protocols, she'd chirped, her voice like grinding gravel. Non-compliant, my foot. She'd made it personal. She'd tried to starve me out, to force me to pack up my life and leave the home I'd poured my heart and savings into. Well, 2 could play at that game. This wasn't just a structure. It was a monument to their petty tyranny, a physical manifestation of my absolute refusal to be pushed around. The air around me crackled with anticipation, a strange mix of vindication and pure, unadulterated defiance. I reached into the specialized case, my fingers brushing against the cool, dark steel. The click as the magazine slid home was soft, yet it echoed in the silence of the night like a hammer blow. My heart thrummed a furious rhythm against my ribs. This was it. The culmination. The first, undeniable statement. A single bead of sweat traced a path down my temple, chilling me despite the heat building inside. Just as my finger settled onto the trigger, a light flickered on in an upstairs window of the HOA office, and the distant bark of a dog cut through the oppressive stillness. My breath hitched. Had someone seen? Was it already over before it had even begun? It had all started so differently. Just a little over a year ago, Willow Creek had felt like a dream come true. After years of saving every extra dime, working double shifts, and making endless sacrifices, I, Alex Miller, a man who believed in the simple goodness of people and the power of a friendly wave, had finally closed on my first home. It wasn't a mansion, just a cozy, 3-bedroom ranch-style house with a sprawling oak tree in the front yard and a patch of sun-drenched lawn that promised endless summer afternoons. I had envisioned backyard barbecues with new friends, quiet evenings on the porch swing, and the joy of finally having a place to call my own, a sanctuary where peace and community thrived. The initial days were a blur of boxes, paint cans, and the sweet smell of fresh lumber as I tackled small renovation projects. The previous owner had left it in good shape, but I wanted to add my personal touch, make it truly mine. I remembered standing in the empty living room, the echo of my own footsteps the only sound, and feeling a profound sense of gratitude. This was the fresh start I'd yearned for, a quiet suburban haven after the hustle and bustle of city life. The neighbors seemed friendly enough, offering quick smiles and nods as I unpacked my truck. The kids rode bikes down the tree-lined streets, their laughter echoing happily. It felt like a postcard, a perfect slice of Americana. I even baked a batch of my grandmother's famous chocolate chip cookies, planning to distribute them to my immediate neighbors as a gesture of goodwill. My first official encounter with the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, or rather, with its most prominent and formidable representative, happened on a Tuesday morning. I was wrestling a particularly stubborn rhododendron bush into submission, covered in dirt and sweat, when a perfectly manicured hand tapped lightly on my shoulder. I turned, startled, to find a woman standing there, impeccably dressed in a crisp linen suit, despite it being a humid summer day. Her silver hair was coiffed into an unyielding helmet, and her eyes, framed by severe spectacles, were the color of cold steel. She held a clipboard with an air of immense authority. "Mr. Miller, I presume," she stated, not asked, her voice sharp and precise, like the snap of a fresh bank note. "Deborah Vance." I am the president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. I straightened up, wiping my brow with the back of my glove. Oh, hello, Ms. Vance. Please, call me Alex. It's a pleasure to meet you. I extended a dirt-smudged hand, but she simply gazed at it as if it were a particularly interesting, yet potentially infectious, specimen. She didn't offer hers. Indeed, she replied, her lips thinning into a barely perceptible line. I just wanted to introduce myself and, as a matter of formality, point out that your current, shall we say, landscaping efforts, appear to be encroaching upon the designated common area by approximately 1.7 feet. Our bylaws, Section 4, subsection C, clearly stipulate a minimum setback of 2 feet from the property line for all shrubbery exceeding 18 inches in height. My jaw dropped slightly. I glanced at the rhododendron, then at the invisible property line, then back at Deborah. I had literally just moved in. This was my first interaction with the HOA, and it was about 1.7 feet of a shrub. I managed a weak smile. Ah, I see. My apologies, Ms. Vance. I just got it in the ground. I'll certainly adjust it. See that you do, she said, her gaze sweeping over my yard, lingering on a stray leaf that had dared to venture beyond my property line. We maintain very high standards in Willow Creek, Mr. Miller. We expect all residents to adhere to them, for the collective good of our property values. With a final, curt nod, she turned and walked away, her back ramrod straight, leaving me standing there, a slightly bewildered expression on my face, the cookie plate I'd planned to offer her still sitting forgotten on my porch steps. The cookies, I realized, would remain uneaten by any neighbor, at least not today. I brushed it off, chalking it up to a new neighborhood strictness. Every community had its quirks, right? I dutifully dug up the rhododendron, shifted it back, and replanted it, ensuring it met the exact 2-foot setback. I even measured it with a tape measure, just to be sure. It felt a bit silly, but I was determined to be a good neighbor, to fit in. I wanted peace, not conflict. The small annoyances, however, began to pile up, like tiny pebbles turning into a mountain. A week later, a formal-looking notice arrived in my mailbox. It was a courtesy violation for improper placement of waste receptacle. Apparently, my trash bins, which I had dutifully placed at the curb on collection day, were 2 inches too far to the left of my driveway entrance. 2 inches. Another notice followed about the excessive illumination of exterior holiday lighting in November, even though I'd only put up a single string of warm white lights around my porch. Then came the one about my garden hose, neatly coiled by my spigot, being too visible from the street, detracting from neighborhood aesthetics. It was a standard green hose, for goodness sake. Each time, I'd sigh, shake my head, and comply, often with a growing sense of disbelief. I started to feel like I was living under a microscope, constantly scrutinized for the slightest deviation. I tried to appeal to reason. I sent polite, carefully worded emails to the HOA board, pointing out the absurdity of some of these violations. I even attended a monthly HOA meeting, hoping to voice my concerns in person, to perhaps suggest a more lenient approach, a bit more understanding. When I stood up to speak, Deborah Vance, presiding over the meeting with an almost regal air, cut me off mid-sentence. Mr. Miller, she declared, her voice echoing in the small community hall, the bylaws are not suggestions. They are rules, established to maintain the harmony and value of Willow Creek. If you find them inconvenient, perhaps this is not the community for you. A few heads in the room nodded in agreement, seemingly under her spell. I saw a couple of people shift uncomfortably in their seats, but no one spoke up in my defense. It was clear that Deborah ran the show, and dissent was not welcome. I left that meeting feeling deflated, a cold knot forming in my stomach. The dream of a peaceful community was slowly eroding, replaced by the grim reality of a petty dictatorship. Still, I told myself, I wouldn't let it get to me. I'd continue to be kind, to smile, to show them that a good neighbor was worth more than a perfectly coiled hose. My attempts at friendliness, however, were consistently rebuffed. I'd wave to Deborah as she power-walked past my house, only to receive a stiff, unblinking stare in return. I tried offering to help a neighbor whose car had a flat tire, only for Deborah to appear seemingly out of nowhere, clipboard in hand, to remind us both about unauthorized vehicle maintenance in common areas. It felt like she was everywhere, always watching, always ready to pounce on the slightest perceived infraction. Then came the escalation, the moment when the petty annoyances transformed into outright hostility, and my patience, once a boundless ocean, began to run dry. I had planned a small, much-needed renovation to my kitchen. Nothing major, just replacing the countertops and a few old cabinets. I ordered the custom granite slabs and new cabinetry from a local supplier, carefully timing the delivery for a Saturday morning when I'd be home to receive them. I had everything prepared, the old cabinets removed, the kitchen cleared, ready for the transformation. The delivery truck, a large flatbed loaded with my precious materials, pulled up to the entrance of Willow Creek precisely at 8 a.m. I watched from my porch, a sense of excited anticipation bubbling inside me. But then, I saw her. Deborah Vance, standing at the gate, talking to the delivery driver. Her arms were crossed, her posture rigid, and even from a distance, I could tell she was in full HOA president mode. The driver looked confused, then frustrated. He pointed towards my house. Deborah shook her head emphatically. My stomach dropped. I jogged down my driveway, a growing dread seizing me. "Everything all right?" I called out as I approached the gate. The driver, a burly man named Roy with a kind face, threw his hands up in exasperation. "Your HOA lady here says I can't come in, sir. Says I need a special large vehicle access permit that you apparently didn't secure. And something about deliveries only being allowed between 9 a.m. and 4 p.m., Tuesdays and Thursdays. She's citing some Section 7, subsection D, says my truck will disrupt the tranquility of the neighborhood." My eyes darted to Deborah. Her face was impassive, a mask of self-righteous authority. "The bylaws are clear, Mr. Miller. Large vehicle deliveries require prior written approval and adherence to specified schedules to prevent inconvenience to other residents. You failed to notify the board and acquire the necessary permit. Therefore, this delivery is non-compliant." But I didn't know about any large vehicle access permit. I protested, my voice rising. "This is crucial for my kitchen. My old countertops are already out." Deborah simply shrugged, a small, almost imperceptible smirk playing on her lips. "Ignorance of the bylaws is not an excuse, Mr. Miller. Roy, I'm afraid you'll have to turn around. You are not authorized to proceed." Roy looked at me apologetically. "Sorry, pal. My company's got strict rules about HOA interference. Can't risk it." He climbed back into his truck, the engine rumbled to life, and with a heavy heart, I watched my new kitchen materials, my essential supplies, drive away, taking with them a piece of my hope. I stood there, staring at the empty road, then at Deborah Vance, who now looked at me with an expression of cold triumph. It wasn't about permits or rules. It was about power. It was about control. It was about sending a clear message. "You don't belong here, and I will make your life miserable until you leave." My kitchen, a gaping hole where the countertops should have been, suddenly felt like a gaping wound. A profound, icy resolve settled over me. Kindness, empathy, understanding, they had no place in Willow Creek, not when confronted by pure, unadulterated malice. And in that moment, looking at the retreating truck, then at Deborah's unwavering stare, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was done playing by their rules. A different kind of plan, far less compliant, began to form in the deepest, most shadowed corners of my mind. The delivery truck's rumbling engine faded into the distance, leaving me standing alone on the quiet street, my heart pounding like a trapped bird. The early morning sun, which had promised a day of excited renovation, now felt cold and mocking on my face. My kitchen lay exposed, half demolished, a stark reminder of Deborah Vance's chilling power. She still stood by the entrance to Willow Creek, watching me, a faint, almost invisible smile playing on her lips, before she turned and glided away, disappearing behind the neatly trimmed hedges. A wave of raw, unfiltered fury washed over me, so intense it made my hands tremble. My new home, my sanctuary, was being invaded, not by burglars, but by a woman wielding a clipboard and a twisted interpretation of community rules. My first thought was to confront her, to shout, to demand answers, to shake some sense into her. But what good would that do? I had tried reason, kindness, even humble apologies for imagined infractions. Each attempt had only fueled her fire, strengthening her resolve to make my life difficult. My mind raced, searching for an answer, a way to fight back that wasn't just screaming into the wind. I pictured myself knocking on her door, calmly explaining the impact of her actions, appealing to her sense of fairness. But fairness, I knew by now, was a foreign concept to Deborah Vance. Her game wasn't about right or wrong, it was about control. This wasn't just about a delivery, it was about forcing me out, plain and simple. She wanted me gone, and she was using every tool at her disposal. I closed my eyes, taking a deep, ragged breath. This feeling, this helpless anger, was a bitter taste in my mouth. I had to find a way to make her stop, a way to protect my home, my future, my peace. For days, the blocked delivery haunted me. I tried to reschedule, but the supplier, after speaking with the HOA, was hesitant. They cited logistical difficulties and community restrictions, clearly intimidated by Deborah. I tried to get another company, but the same story repeated itself. My kitchen remained a desolate construction zone. The smell of sawdust lingered, a constant reminder of my stalled dreams. I spent hours hunched over my laptop, meticulously poring over every single page of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association bylaws. The tiny print blurred before my eyes, filled with dense legal jargon, obscure clauses, and endless subsections. I highlighted, underlined, and made notes, searching for any loophole, any forgotten rule, any tiny crack in Deborah Vance's meticulously constructed fortress of control. There had to be something. There had to be a way to fight her within the system. My belief in order, in following the proper channels, was still strong, even if it was starting to fray around the edges. I compiled a thick binder filled with my own carefully documented evidence, dates of violations, copies of emails, photographs of my perfectly compliant lawn hose. I even included printouts of the bylaws themselves, with my annotations pointing out where Deborah's interpretation seemed to stretch the truth, or where her actions contradicted the stated purpose of the HOA. I sought advice from a lawyer in the nearest town, Ms. Jenkins, a woman with kind eyes and a weary sigh that suggested she'd heard many a story about tyrannical HOAs. Her office was small, filled with stacks of legal books and the quiet hum of an old air conditioner. She listened patiently as I laid out my case, my voice trembling with a mixture of frustration and a lingering hope. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Mr. Miller," she began, her voice soft but firm, HOAs, while technically non-profit organizations, wield a surprising amount of power. They often act like mini-governments. Their bylaws, once agreed upon by residents, are legally binding contracts. Fighting them can be an incredibly uphill battle, particularly if the board president is as entrenched and, shall we say, assertive, as Ms. Vance sounds. She explained that while some of Deborah's actions seemed petty, proving malicious intent was nearly impossible in court. The large vehicle access permit, or specific delivery hours, could, technically, be added to bylaws through a board vote, even if I hadn't been aware of them. The cost of a lawsuit, she warned, could quickly spiral into tens of thousands of dollars, with no guarantee of success. Most people, Ms. Jenkins concluded, her voice laced with sympathy, simply give up. It's often cheaper and less stressful to move than to fight a determined HOA president in court. I walked out of her office feeling as though a lead weight had been dropped into my stomach. The right way was a dead end. Still, I wasn't ready to give up. I attended the next HOA general meeting, my binder clutched tightly in my hands, determined to make my voice heard, to appeal to the other residents, to find some shred of community spirit. The meeting was held in the same small community hall where I'd been rebuffed before. Deborah Vance, as always, sat at the head of the long table, a queen on her throne. When it was time for resident concerns, I stood up, my heart hammering. I spoke calmly, clearly, outlining the difficulties I faced, not just with the kitchen delivery, but with the endless stream of nitpicking violations. I even tried to explain my philosophy, that a community thrives on understanding and mutual respect, not on rigid, fear-based enforcement. Perhaps, I suggested, looking out at the other faces in the room, we could consider a more flexible approach, particularly for new residents. A little kindness, a little empathy, goes a long way in building a stronger community. Deborah listened, her face unreadable, her eyes fixed on me with an unnerving intensity. When I finished, a hush fell over the room. Then, a few murmurs. Before anyone else could speak, Deborah tapped her pen sharply on the table. "Mr. Miller," she announced, her voice resonating with authority, "your concerns have been noted. However, as I stated previously, the bylaws are in place for the collective good. Your difficulties appear to stem from a lack of adherence to established rules, not from the rules themselves. If we bend them for one, we must bend them for all, and then chaos ensues. We are here to maintain order, not to foster flexibility that diminishes property values." A few residents nodded vigorously. Others shifted in their seats, avoiding my gaze. I saw a fleeting look of sympathy from a woman named Sarah, who lived 2 houses down. She gave me a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head, as if to say, "It's no use." I sat down, my shoulders slumping, the weight of their collective indifference pressing down on me. My carefully constructed arguments, my hopes for reason, had crumbled against the unyielding wall of Deborah's power. Later that week, I saw Sarah while I was watering my sad, half-dead rose bushes. She walked over cautiously, a small casserole dish in her hands. "Alex," she said, her voice soft, "I brought you some dinner. Heard about your kitchen. And the meeting. Look, I just wanted to say, not everyone here is like Deborah. She's got a lot of people scared. But some of us, we see what's happening." Her eyes held genuine concern. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world. It reminded me that not everyone in Willow Creek was a lost cause, that some still held a spark of kindness. "Thank you, Sarah," I replied, a genuine smile finally breaking through my frustration. "That means a lot." But even Sarah, with her kind heart, couldn't directly challenge Deborah. The fear was too strong. My legal options were exhausted, and appealing to the community was fruitless. I was truly on my own. The turning point, the true breaking point, came 2 weeks later. I received a new, official-looking envelope, thicker than the usual notices. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a formal letter from the HOA board, signed, of course, by Deborah Vance. It was a notice of intent to levy fine and place lien. The violation? Unauthorized structural modification and egregious aesthetic disfigurement of primary dwelling. The accompanying evidence was a single blurry photograph of my kitchen from an angle that made it look like a war zone, clearly taken during my stalled renovation. The fine was astronomical. $500 per day until the violation was rectified, with a threat of placing a lien on my home if not paid within 30 days. $500 a day for having a half-finished kitchen I couldn't finish because they blocked my supplies. This wasn't just petty anymore. This was a direct, devastating attack on my home, my financial stability, my very right to live here. They wanted to seize my house, to force me into bankruptcy and out of the community. The letter fluttered to the floor. I stood there, staring at my half-finished kitchen, then out the window towards the HOA office, where a faint light still glowed. The shock quickly morphed into a cold, hard rage that settled deep in my bones. All my attempts at being reasonable, at being kind, at playing by their rules, had been met with nothing but escalating hostility and deliberate cruelty. They had blocked my supplies, they had ridiculed me, and now they were trying to take my home. Deborah Vance wasn't just strict. She was a predator, systematically dismantling my life, piece by piece. A grim, determined smile spread across my face. If they wanted to play dirty, then dirty it would be. If they wanted to push me, I would push back, harder than they could possibly imagine. My mind, usually filled with thoughts of garden gnomes and cookie recipes, began to churn with a new kind of idea, a dangerous, defiant whisper of a plan. It wouldn't be legal, not in the traditional sense, but it would be perfectly within my property rights, a statement so audacious, so utterly unexpected, it would shake Willow Creek to its core. My gaze settled on the empty space directly in front of their office. It was a common area, but technically accessible. And it would make the perfect spot. The perfect stage. I pulled out my phone, a new kind of purpose fueling my fingers, and started to search for specialized suppliers. The search wasn't for kitchen countertops anymore. It was for something much, much louder. A cold, steely resolve hardened my heart after I received Deborah Vance's latest threat, the lien on my home. My hands, still trembling from the outrageousness of the fine, clenched into fists. I stood in my half-finished kitchen, surrounded by the ghosts of what could have been, and a new, fiery determination ignited within me. The gentle man who believed in compromise and turning the other cheek was gone, replaced by someone who understood that some battles couldn't be won with kindness alone. Deborah had used their rules like weapons, trying to dismantle my life. Now, I would use the very concept of rules against her, but in a way she would never expect. My plan, born from desperation and a growing defiance, began to take shape in the quiet hours of the night. It was audacious, perhaps even a little crazy, but it felt right. The very first step involved acquiring the materials. This wasn't something you just picked up at the local hardware store. I needed specific items, things that wouldn't raise suspicion if bought individually but would form a very clear picture when put together. My searches were careful, precise, and always done late at night, under the cloak of internet anonymity. I found specialized websites, forums for enthusiasts of, shall we say, recreational shooting. I ordered a range-grade backstop material, something dense and able to safely absorb impacts without ricochet. It was heavy, industrial-grade stuff, sold in large sheets, and I had to arrange for it to be delivered to a friend's house outside Willow Creek, far from Deborah's prying eyes. My friend, David, a good old college buddy, didn't ask too many questions when I told him it was for a secret art project. He just chuckled and agreed to hold the packages for me. Next came the framework. I needed something sturdy, quick to assemble, and, crucially, transportable. I settled on a modular steel frame kit, typically used for large outdoor shelters or temporary structures. I purchased sections of heavy-duty steel piping and connectors from different suppliers, sending them to different addresses, again, outside the neighborhood. Each delivery was small enough to fit in my old sedan. I made multiple trips, late at night, under the cover of darkness, ferrying the pieces back to my garage. The process was slow, painstaking, and filled with the constant fear of being seen. Every creak of my car's suspension, every distant dog bark, sent a jolt of panic through me. I worked only when I was sure no one was watching, when the streetlights cast long, lonely shadows, and most of Willow Creek was asleep. Inside my garage, illuminated by a single bare bulb, the pile of materials slowly grew. The steel pipes glinted dully, the heavy backstop sheets leaned against the wall like silent sentinels. I studied the diagrams, rehearsing the assembly in my mind, imagining each bolt, each connection. It had to be fast, precise, and strong. I researched local ordinances regarding temporary structures and noise, looking for loopholes. The key was to make it just compliant enough to be a headache, but not outright illegal, at least not at first glance. It was about creating a nuisance, a disruption that couldn't be easily ignored or removed without a fight. My old self, the one who tried to be a good citizen, winced at the thought of causing such a disturbance. But then I remembered the kitchen, the lien, Deborah's smug face, and the wince turned into a grim smile. The construction phase itself was a lesson in patience and stealth. I couldn't build it all at once, not where anyone could see. I assembled sections of the frame in my garage, late at night, using only hand tools to keep the noise down. The clinking of wrenches, the soft thud of metal on concrete, each sound seemed deafening in the stillness of the night. I moved like a ghost, working in bursts, then pausing, listening, straining to hear if any neighbor's light had flickered on, if a car had driven by too slowly. My sleep became fractured, filled with visions of steel pipes and angry HOA notices. My eyes constantly scanned my surroundings, my ears pricked for any sign of movement. I felt like a spy in my own home, a builder of secrets. One afternoon, while I was carefully sanding down some rough edges on a wooden component I'd crafted, a small, innocuous-looking piece that would be part of the final structure, I heard a gentle tap at my garage door. My heart leaped into my throat. I froze, my hand hovering over the wood, expecting to see Deborah Vance, clipboard in hand, ready to issue a new violation. Instead, when I cautiously opened the door just a crack, I saw Sarah, the kind neighbor who had brought me a casserole. She held a small plate of freshly baked cookies. "Alex?" "Just checking in," she whispered, her eyes full of genuine concern. "Haven't seen you much lately. And that kitchen, still not done?" She glanced pointedly at my empty driveway, where the delivery truck should have been. I managed a weak smile, trying to appear nonchalant, my body instinctively shielding the parts of the frame visible inside the garage. "Oh, hey, Sarah. Yeah, still dealing with that. It's complicated. Just trying to figure things out, you know." I took a cookie from the plate. It was warm, comforting, a small island of kindness in a sea of stress. "I can only imagine," she said, her voice soft. "Deborah's been particularly vigilant lately. Saw her circling your house the other day. Just wanted to let you know some of us are rooting for you, even if we can't do much." She gave my arm a quick, sympathetic squeeze, then turned to leave. "Hang in there, Alex." Her words were a balm, a reminder that not everyone in Willow Creek was a drone under Deborah's command. There were still good people, quiet allies, even if they couldn't openly defy the HOA. That small interaction, that sliver of human connection, solidified my resolve even further. It wasn't just about my personal revenge anymore. It was about standing up to a bully, about showing that even ordinary people could fight back against overbearing power. It was about reclaiming a sense of fairness for everyone, even if they were too afraid to fight for themselves. The final piece of the puzzle was the most daring. The base. I needed a way to anchor the structure firmly, yet temporarily, on the common property, making it difficult to simply push over. I spent days sketching designs, figuring out the safest and most efficient way. I even considered concrete, but that would be too permanent, too difficult to explain away. I settled on heavy, interlocking base plates, similar to those used for scaffolding, which I could quickly bolt together. These were the largest, heaviest pieces, and they would require careful timing for transport and assembly. The night of the final assembly was dark and moonless, perfect for my clandestine operation. I had monitored Deborah's movements for days, noting her usual bedtime, the times she left for her morning walk. I waited until well past midnight, until the last lights in the neighborhood winked out. My heart hammered against my ribs, a drumbeat of adrenaline. I loaded the remaining sections of the frame and the heavy base plates into the back of my truck, covered by a tarp. Every rustle of the tarp, every clang of metal, sounded impossibly loud in the overwhelming silence. I drove slowly, painstakingly, towards the HOA building, a mere block from my house. The common area in front of their office, a perfectly manicured stretch of grass and decorative shrubs, was my target. It was where they held their community events, their annual summer picnic, their infamous Yard of the Month judging. It was their pride and joy, their symbol of control. I parked my truck discreetly a few houses away, out of sight of the HOA building itself, and began to unload the pieces. It was exhausting work, hauling the heavy steel, one piece at a time, across the quiet lawns, avoiding sprinkler heads and carefully navigating garden decorations. My muscles screamed in protest, but I pushed through the pain, fueled by a simmering anger and the grim satisfaction of knowing what I was doing. Each trip was a risk, each step a gamble. I worked with a frantic energy, yet every movement was deliberate, calculated. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the faint scent of damp earth. Finally, the last piece was in place. The main structure of the gun range stood tall and stark, a defiant silhouette against the ink-black sky, directly in front of the HOA office entrance. The sturdy steel frame, the thick backstop, it was all there, ready. My heart swelled with a mix of exhaustion, triumph, and a nervous flutter of anticipation. It wasn't fully equipped yet, the finer details and the targets themselves would come later, under a less intense spotlight. But the core was there, undeniable, unmissable. I stepped back, wiping sweat from my brow, and gazed at my handiwork. It was a silent challenge, a monument to their overreach, designed to be seen, to be questioned, to disrupt their perfectly ordered world. The first hint of dawn was beginning to paint the eastern sky with a faint, pale gray, a whisper of the impending morning. Soon, the first early riser, perhaps a jogger or someone walking their dog, would round the corner and see it. And then, the silence of Willow Creek would be shattered, not by a gunshot, but by a collective gasp of disbelief. The pale, hesitant light of dawn slowly crept over Willow Creek, painting the quiet streets in shades of soft gray and rose. I stood hidden behind the thick curtains of my living room window, watching the HOA building, my heart a nervous drum in my chest. The steel structure I had spent countless sleepless nights assembling now stood like a defiant sentinel directly in front of their entrance, its stark silhouette cutting against the warming sky. It was large, undeniable, and impossible to miss. A knot formed in my stomach, a strange mix of fear and exhilarating triumph. I had done it. The waiting began. The first discovery came shortly after 6 o'clock. A woman, wearing bright running shoes and a determined expression, rounded the corner, her dog trotting patiently beside her. Her usual morning jog route took her directly past the HOA building. As she drew closer, she stopped dead in her tracks, pulling her dog up short. Her head tilted, her brow furrowed in confusion, then her mouth fell open. She pointed, muttering something to her dog, who barked excitedly, unaware of the silent drama unfolding. She took a few steps closer, walked around the structure, and then pulled out her phone, snapping a blurry picture before hurrying away, her jog forgotten. The ripple had begun. Soon, another dog walker appeared, then a man retrieving his newspaper. Each person reacted with the same wide-eyed disbelief, stopping, staring, and pointing. Whispers began to spread like wildfire. I could almost hear the questions echoing through the waking neighborhood. What is that? Who put it there? What does it mean? I watched their reactions, a grim satisfaction settling over me. They saw it as an eyesore, a giant, ugly metal box. They didn't know what it truly was, not yet. But it was there, undeniably there, challenging their perfectly manicured world, exactly as I had intended. The chaos was quiet, but it was brewing, a slow burn that promised to ignite into a roaring fire. The morning unfolded like a slow-motion play, each act more absurd than the last. More residents emerged, drawn by the whispers, standing on their lawns, pointing towards the HOA building. Cars slowed to a crawl as drivers gawked. A few residents even approached the structure cautiously, circling it, running their hands over the smooth, cold steel of the frame, trying to figure out its purpose. I noticed Mr. Henderson, a retired history teacher who lived across the street, peering at it through his binoculars, a puzzled expression on his usually placid face. The collective bewilderment was almost comical, a stark contrast to the boiling anger that had driven me to this desperate act. Around 8:30 a.m., Deborah Vance herself appeared. She strode out of her own meticulously kept home, just a few blocks away, her usual impeccable posture somehow even stiffer. She carried her omnipresent clipboard. She must have heard the murmurs, felt the shift in the neighborhood's quiet rhythm. Her eyes, usually so sharp and commanding, widened slightly as they landed on the enormous steel structure occupying her precious common area. Her mouth, usually a thin, disapproving line, dropped open in an almost comical O shape. For a fleeting moment, she looked truly stunned, and I felt a surge of cold, hard victory. Then, her face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. Her silver hair seemed to bristle. She stomped towards the structure, her high heels clicking sharply on the sidewalk, like a tiny general marching into battle. She circled it furiously, muttering under her breath, running a gloved hand over the steel as if trying to find a hidden switch that would make it vanish. Her eyes scanned for any identifying marks, any clue as to who dared to defy her so brazenly. She tried to push it, to nudge it, but the structure, firmly anchored by its heavy base plates, barely budged. Her frustration was clear, even from my window. She pulled out her phone, barking orders into it, her voice undoubtedly as sharp as a newly sharpened pencil. She then began to scribble furiously on her clipboard, no doubt drafting a new set of courtesy violations that would be both ridiculous and expensive. This was no petty lawn gnome, this was a Goliath on her doorstep, and she was clearly unsure how to fell it. The rest of the day saw a flurry of activity around the HOA building. A maintenance truck arrived, then another, filled with various tools, but the workers just stood around, scratching their heads, looking at the structure as if it were a mysterious alien artifact. They tried a few things, a pry bar here, a crowbar there, but the sturdy steel frame held firm. They were clearly baffled, unable to dismantle something they couldn't even properly identify. Deborah was there, supervising, directing, her voice carrying across the quiet lawns. She seemed to be growing more agitated with each failed attempt to move the giant metal box. The humor of the situation was not lost on me, despite the underlying tension. It was delicious, watching her flounder, caught in her own web of rigid rules and lack of imagination. In the afternoon, I got a text from Sarah. "Hey, Alex. You seen the new, community art installation?" She added a grinning emoji, then a more serious one. "It's wild. Deborah's absolutely beside herself. HOA meeting tonight is going to be a doozy." Her message was a small comfort. It was good to know someone else saw the humor, even if they couldn't publicly acknowledge my involvement. It reinforced that not everyone was blind to Deborah's true nature. I just replied, "Oh. Really? Haven't been out much, playing dumb, trying to keep my poker face, or rather, my text face, straight." The HOA board meeting that evening was, as Sarah predicted, a spectacle. It was moved to the larger community hall, because Deborah clearly expected a massive turnout. She wasn't wrong. The room was packed, buzzing with a mixture of outrage, curiosity, and a few suppressed titters. I sat in the back, blending into the shadows, observing the faces, trying to gauge the true sentiment of my neighbors. Deborah Vance stood at the podium, her face flushed with barely contained fury. "Residents of Willow Creek," she boomed, her voice echoing through the hall. We are here tonight to address a grave affront to our community standards. An unknown, unauthorized, and frankly, unsightly structure has been erected on our common property, without permit, without notice, and in blatant disregard for our carefully established bylaws. She gestured wildly towards the window, as if the structure itself would appear in the room. This is an act of vandalism. An act of defiance. A direct challenge to the very fabric of order and harmony we have meticulously cultivated in Willow Creek. She went on, her voice growing shriller, for what felt like an eternity, listing every conceivable violation the structure represented: aesthetic disfigurement, obstruction of common area, potential safety hazard, unauthorized construction. She accused the unknown perpetrator of everything from petty malice to a deliberate attempt to devalue their homes. She talked about property values, about the good name of Willow Creek, about the need to uphold standards. Her words were a torrent of anger and indignation, but they lacked any real solution, any hint of how this vandalism would be undone. When she finally paused for breath, a few residents chimed in, some echoing her outrage, others just sounding confused. "But what is it, Deborah?" one man asked. "Is it some kind of art?" Another piped up, "Can we just call the police and have it removed?" Deborah slammed her hand on the podium. "We are investigating every avenue. The police have been notified, but they say it's a civil matter for now. It's a temporary structure, so they won't simply come and haul it away. We are working to identify the culprit, and when we do, they will face the full extent of the HOA's penalties." She looked out at the crowd, her eyes blazing, trying to whip them into a unified frenzy of righteous anger. "This cannot stand, my friends. This attack on our community must be met with a unified front. We must show this rebel, that Willow Creek will not be intimidated." Her words, however, seemed to fall short for many. There was no rallying cry, no unified roar of support. Many faces remained blank, some looked weary, and I even saw a few subtle shrugs. A couple of people exchanged glances, a hint of something unsaid passing between them. They were tired of Deborah's drama, tired of her constant battles. They just wanted their quiet lives. The meeting devolved into a chaotic exchange of frustrated questions and Deborah's increasingly agitated responses. She was losing control, not of the structure, but of the narrative, of the community's collective outrage. She still had no idea what it was, or what it was truly for. She had only seen an unsightly structure. She hadn't seen the beginning of her undoing. The meeting ended with no clear path forward, only a palpable sense of unease and a growing frustration, not just with the mysterious structure, but with Deborah herself. I slipped out of the hall, unnoticed, a small, grim smile playing on my lips. The stage was set. The audience was bewildered. And the star of the show was about to make his real debut. The air in Willow Creek crackled with a strange mix of confusion and indignation after the tumultuous HOA meeting. Deborah Vance, her face still a blotchy red, stalked out of the community hall, leaving behind a bewildered crowd. The colossal steel structure remained rooted firmly on the common property, a silent, defiant challenge to her authority. For days, the mystery of the eyesore, as Deborah constantly called it, consumed her. I watched from my window, a quiet observer of the chaos I had sown. I saw her pacing outside the HOA building, speaking intensely into her phone, her gestures growing wilder with each passing hour. Maintenance crews returned, armed with blueprints and heavy tools, but they still couldn't figure out how to dismantle the robust, specialized frame. They scratched their heads, clearly out of their depth, leaving the structure undisturbed, much to Deborah's visible exasperation. Her attempts to identify the owner were equally fruitless. Flyers appeared on mailboxes, threatening fines for anyone with information about the unauthorized installation. Deborah personally interrogated several residents, her questions sharp and pointed, but no one seemed to know anything, or at least, no one was willing to admit it. She called building code enforcement, the county zoning office, even the fire department, trying to find some legal lever to pry my creation from her perfectly manicured lawn. Each call, however, seemed to end in frustration. The structure was just there, solid and unyielding, a monument to defiance that defied easy categorization or removal. It was temporary, yet substantial. It had no obvious purpose, yet it was clearly built with intent. This ambiguity was my secret weapon, giving me time. Meanwhile, life in Willow Creek took on a bizarre new rhythm. The mysterious structure became the talk of the neighborhood. Children dared each other to touch it, giggling as they ran away. Teenagers posed for selfies in front of it. Residents gathered in small groups, whispering and speculating. I overheard snippets of conversation, some wildly off the mark, others surprisingly close. "I bet it's one of those newfangled beehives," a woman told her husband, peering at the sound-dampening panels I'd subtly started to install, designed to look like decorative fencing. "Or maybe a giant modern bird feeder," another suggested, pointing to the empty spaces where targets would eventually go. My favorite guess came from a delivery driver who insisted it was a fancy new bus stop for aliens. The absurdity of it all almost made me laugh out loud. The general opinion was divided. Some were outraged by the blight on their perfect community, others found it amusing, and a few, like Sarah, quietly rooted for the anonymous rebel who had dared to stand up to Deborah. My work, however, was far from over. The structure was in place, but its true purpose remained hidden. Now, it was time to add the subtle clues, the pieces that would eventually reveal its nature without giving it away too soon. Working only in the dead of night, usually between 2 and 4 a.m., when the entire neighborhood seemed to hold its breath in sleep, I began to add the more distinctive elements. I carefully attached rows of small, circular target frames to the backstop, designing them to look like abstract art when empty. I installed a small, hinged shelf at the front, which could easily be mistaken for a planter box. And around the sides, I attached a series of thick, sound-absorbing panels, carefully disguised with a textured, wood-like veneer. They looked like expensive, modern privacy screens, but their true purpose was to muffle the sound. Each night, as I painstakingly bolted and screwed, my mind replayed Deborah's words, her sneer, the memory of my kitchen supplies being turned away. This wasn't about property values, it was about crushing dissent. My actions, I reasoned, were a form of self-defense, a stand against a bully. I might be causing a disturbance, but it was nothing compared to the daily harassment and financial threats Deborah had aimed at me. Kindness, I reflected, was a powerful force, but it required a receptive heart. Deborah's heart seemed made of granite. This structure was my last resort, a desperate attempt to reclaim my peace. My focus was absolute, my movements quiet and deliberate. The cold night air invigorated me, sharpening my senses. The physical exertion was a welcome distraction from the mental strain. One evening, as I was discreetly wheeling a small cart containing more of the decorative panels from my garage, I nearly ran into Sarah, who was walking her poodle. It was just after midnight, unusually late for her. My heart leaped. I quickly covered the cart with a dark tarp. "Alex? What on earth are you doing out so late?" she whispered, her eyes wide, peering at the shadowy lump on my cart. I tried to sound casual. "Oh, Sarah. Just moving some old lumber. Doing a bit of late-night tidying. You know how it is." I forced a laugh, hoping it sounded convincing. She looked at me, then at the tarp, a knowing glint in her eyes. She didn't say anything, but a faint, knowing smile touched her lips. "Right," she said, her voice soft. "Well, be careful out there, Alex. It's getting pretty wild around the HOA building." She paused, then added, "Seems like someone's got Deborah really riled up. She was telling my husband this morning she's going to find out who did it, no matter what it takes. Said she's hired some kind of special investigator to look into it." My blood ran cold for a moment. A special investigator? That meant someone was actively looking for me. But then I saw the faint glimmer of approval in Sarah's eyes, a silent message of support. "I'm sure she will," I replied, feigning nonchalance. "Good night, Sarah." She nodded, still smiling faintly, and walked away. The encounter fueled both my fear and my resolve. The net was tightening, but Deborah was still chasing ghosts. The turning point came a few days later, just as I was planning to install the final, most revealing component, a small, sturdy, clear polycarbonate shield that would function as a sight guard, a clear sign of its true purpose, but still could be passed off as a modern windbreak. I hadn't installed it yet, but it was ready. The HOA had called an emergency board meeting, even more urgent than the last. I heard about it from an anonymous email tip that simply said, "Be there. It's about the structure. Deborah's found something." When I arrived at the community hall, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. The room was packed, hushed, expectant. Deborah Vance stood at the podium, her face pale, her lips pressed into a thin, grim line. There was no anger now, only a chilling, controlled fury. Beside her stood a man in a crisp suit, holding a large, rolled-up blueprint. "Residents of Willow Creek," Deborah began, her voice low and resonant, "for weeks, we have endured a deliberate act of defiance against our community. An unsightly structure has plagued our common area. We have diligently investigated its purpose, its ownership, and its legality. And tonight, I am here to tell you that we have finally uncovered the truth." She nodded to the man beside her. He unrolled the blueprint. It was a highly detailed schematic, clearly professional, showing a design for an outdoor shooting range, complete with firing lines, backstops, and target placements. It was identical, in every key detail, to the structure I had built. My blood ran cold. How had they gotten this? Had someone seen me? Had they somehow found my online orders, traced my purchases? Through exhaustive research and consultation with experts, Deborah continued, her eyes sweeping over the stunned faces in the crowd, "We have determined that this structure is, in fact, a crude, yet fully functional, outdoor firing range. The panels are sound dampeners. The circular frames are for targets. The specific materials used are for bullet absorption." Her voice rose, filled with a renewed, terrifying outrage. "Someone, a resident of this community, has illegally constructed a gun range on our common property. A place where our children play. A place meant for peace and tranquility." A collective gasp swept through the room, followed by a wave of horrified whispers. Fear, raw and palpable, replaced the earlier confusion. "A gun range," someone cried out. "In Willow Creek," another shouted. The outrage was no longer confused, it was focused, sharp, and terrifyingly unified. Heads turned, searching for answers, for the culprit. They didn't know it was me, not yet. But the air was thick with suspicion, and the real battle was about to begin. The final, terrifying step in my plan was no longer a secret. The very first shot, though silent, had just been fired. The Willow Creek Community Hall had never seen such a furious gathering. Deborah Vance, her face a mask of barely controlled rage, stood before the stunned residents. The truth of the structure, its purpose as an outdoor firing range, had ignited a wildfire of fear and disbelief. Her voice, usually so composed, cracked with a chilling blend of anger and desperation. "This is an act of war against our way of life," she shrieked, pointing dramatically towards the window, as if the steel frame outside were actively spitting bullets. "Someone, a madman, has dared to construct a weapon in our midst. We will find them. We will prosecute them to the fullest extent of the law. This affront will not stand." The crowd buzzed with a mix of genuine fear, furious agreement, and a few whispers of bewildered silence. The fear was thick, making the air heavy and hard to breathe. For the next few days, Deborah's desperation became almost a public spectacle. She practically lived at the HOA office, her sedan a permanent fixture in the parking lot. She made incessant phone calls, her voice rising in frantic crescendos. She tried to rally the community, knocking on doors, urging people to sign petitions demanding immediate removal of the terror structure, and the immediate arrest of the unknown perpetrator. Flyers with stark warnings about the danger of the unauthorized range appeared on every lamppost, some even hinting darkly at a connection to criminal activity. She even tried to organize a community work party to dismantle the range, armed with crowbars and sheer willpower. However, the residents, though nervous, were reluctant. The structure was clearly well built, and no one wanted to be caught trying to illegally remove property that might not even be theirs, or worse, get into a confrontation with the mysterious builder. The few who showed up quickly realized the task was impossible without heavy machinery and proper expertise, and they slowly drifted away, leaving Deborah fuming on her own. The very difficulty of moving the range fueled her rage, making her more unpredictable, more determined. From my quiet vantage point, I watched her frantic efforts, a calm, cold satisfaction settling over me. They were desperate, flailing, and completely unable to counter my move within their own rigid framework of rules. They had called the police again, but the officers, after examining the structure and noting its temporary nature and lack of actual firearms, reiterated that it was a civil dispute. "Looks like a very sturdy, but empty, shed, ma'am," I imagined them saying, and the thought brought a small smile to my lips. Deborah was losing her grip, her iron control over Willow Creek slowly dissolving under the weight of this undeniable, unremovable defiance. With the pressure mounting, I knew my window of opportunity was closing. It was time for the final push. In the dead of night, moving with practiced stealth, I added the final touches to the range. I installed bright, orange bullseye targets onto the circular frames, unmistakable in their purpose. Above the target stands, I mounted a small, neatly lettered sign that simply read, "Safety Zone, please stand behind this line." I even added a small, white flagpole to one corner, though I left it empty for now. Each addition was a deliberate poke, a clear statement that this was, indeed, a functional range, not an art installation or a bus stop for aliens. The transformation was complete. It was no longer a mystery, it was a blatant, in-your-face shooting range. The next morning, the impact was immediate. The neighborhood awoke to the undeniable truth. Gasps replaced whispers. Children were pulled away from the area. Furious residents called the HOA office, demanding action. The fear was no longer about a mysterious structure, it was about the very real possibility of gunshots echoing through their quiet streets. I saw Sarah watching from her porch, her face a mixture of awe and genuine concern. Later that day, she brought me another casserole, her eyes wide. "Alex," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "this is something else. Everyone's talking. Deborah is saying it's an act of domestic terrorism." I just gave her a tired smile. "Some battles can't be fought with words, Sarah." She nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Just, be careful," she urged. The HOA, desperate and cornered, announced an emergency Willow Creek community rally for that very Saturday morning. It was to be held on the common area directly in front of the HOA building, right beside the very structure that caused all the uproar. This was Deborah's last stand, her attempt to publicly shame the unknown perpetrator and unite the community against them. She sent out aggressive emails, demanding attendance, threatening fines for no-shows. The stage was set. Saturday dawned bright and clear, a beautiful summer day, almost mocking the tension that hung heavy in the air. The common area filled rapidly. Neighbors, usually scattered in their own private yards, gathered in a tight, nervous crowd. Deborah Vance stood at a makeshift podium, her usual suit replaced by a severe power dress, her face grim. She began to speak, her voice trembling with barely controlled emotion. "This is our community," she cried out, her voice cracking. This is our home. We will not let this act of aggression define us. We must stand together against this menace. She pointed dramatically at the gun range, her finger shaking. Someone among us has done this. Someone who wishes to terrorize us, to destroy our peace, to threaten our children. As her voice reached a fever pitch, a hush fell over the crowd. Every eye was on Deborah. Every heart pounded with fear and anger. Just then, I stepped out from behind the crowd, walking calmly, deliberately, towards the steel structure. I wore simple work clothes, a baseball cap pulled low, and a pair of dark sunglasses. No one recognized me at first. A few people gasped as they saw me approach the range. Deborah, mid-sentence, saw me too. Her eyes widened, her jaw dropped, and her triumphant, furious expression morphed into one of pure, unadulterated shock. She knew. She didn't know how, but she knew. I reached the front of the range, standing squarely beside it. The crowd parted, creating a silent path behind me. I raised my hand, holding up a single, crisp, perfectly folded sheet of paper. It was my initial kitchen renovation delivery invoice, stamped, refused, with Deborah's own scrawl, clearly visible to those closest to me. For months, I stated, my voice clear and calm, cutting through the stunned silence, I tried to be a good neighbor. I tried to follow the rules. I tried to resolve disputes with kindness and reason. I unfolded the invoice slowly, holding it up. When my essential supplies were blocked, my home was threatened with fines, and my very right to live here was questioned, I tried to fight within the system. But the system was broken. It was used as a weapon. My gaze, hidden behind the sunglasses, swept over the crowd, then settled on Deborah, whose face had gone pale. This isn't an act of terror, I continued, my voice gaining strength. This is an act of self-defense. This is a reminder that when you push people too far, when you abuse your power and strip away their peace, they will find a way to push back. Then, with a deliberate, slow movement, I reached into a small bag I carried. I pulled out a lightweight, bright orange airsoft rifle. It wasn't a real firearm, just a toy, but it looked strikingly similar. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Deborah let out a choked cry. I calmly loaded a small, plastic pellet into the chamber. The click was sharp, echoing loudly in the sudden, terrified silence. I raised the airsoft rifle, aimed it at the bullseye target, and fired. Pop! The plastic pellet hit the bright orange target with a satisfying thwack, making the bullseye spin. I fired another. Pop! Thwack! Then another. Pop! Thwack! Each shot was precise, deliberate, a quiet declaration of defiance. The sound was not deafening like a real gun, but it was startling, a shocking intrusion into the tranquility Deborah so fiercely guarded. People screamed. Some ducked. Others stared, wide-eyed, a mixture of horror and confusion on their faces. Deborah Vance stood frozen at the podium, her mouth agape, her eyes wide with a look of utter, complete defeat. Her carefully constructed world of rules and control had just been shattered, not by a bullet, but by a plastic pellet, a simple, undeniable act of rebellion against her tyranny. The entire neighborhood saw it. They saw her, finally exposed. Sirens wailed in the distance. Police cars, responding to panicked calls, screeched to a halt at the entrance to Willow Creek. Officers swarmed the common area, their faces grim. I calmly placed the airsoft rifle back in my bag, my heart still pounding, but a strange sense of peace washing over me. The officers approached, their hands on their holsters. "Sir, step away from the structure," one commanded. "It's just an airsoft rifle," I said, my voice calm, almost tired. "And this is a temporary structure I built on common property. It's a civil matter, isn't it? Just like my kitchen supplies being blocked." I offered a wry, knowing smile. The situation was too wild, too bizarre, for the police to handle immediately. They couldn't arrest me for firing an airsoft rifle on common property, not without clear, established rules against it. They certainly couldn't arrest me for building a structure, temporary or not, that violated only HOA bylaws. They simply secured the scene and began to try and make sense of the chaos. The community, however, had seen enough. The illusion was broken. Deborah Vance, speechless and trembling, was no longer their unchallenged queen. Whispers started again, but this time they weren't about the structure, they were about Deborah, about her abuses of power, about the fines, the bullying. Within days, petitions circulated, not against me, but against Deborah. Residents, emboldened by my outrageous act of defiance, finally found their voices. An emergency vote was called, and Deborah Vance was swiftly, resoundingly, removed from her position as HOA president, her reign of terror brought to an abrupt and spectacular end. My gun range remained for a short while longer, a silent, stark monument to the day a quiet neighbor pushed back. Eventually, with a new, more reasonable HOA board in place, we came to an amicable agreement. I removed the range, piece by piece, as discreetly as I had built it. My kitchen supplies were finally delivered. Willow Creek slowly began to heal, to find a new balance between rules and reason, between order and empathy. The laughter of children returned to the streets, no longer shadowed by fear. And I, Alex Miller, finally found the peace I had always sought, knowing that sometimes, a little bit of wild defiance is the only way to truly build a home.